Hey guys, it's Andrew David Courtney here, Principal Advisor of Plenitude Wealth. Today we're going to be talking about some things you may want to consider incorporating in your financial plan of attack during this Easter long weekend. So without further ado, let me get started on the slide. So here we are. So Easter investment opportunities for go-getter bunnies and sort of an overarching concept on how to get to your version of financial freedom a hell of a lot sooner. Right? So what we need to do is we need to start off with the basics and go all the way into the nitty-gritty and make sure if you've got any questions, make sure you fire them at me during this particular webinar because there's plenty of time to go over specific questions if you've got them, right? And you don't hesitate to hit me up in the chat box, right? So before we get started, I must tell you that this is all general information only. Please do not take this as personal advice. If you do stay a little bit longer, a little bit later on in the webinar, you will get all the resources. You will get a workbook, a doubling game workbook, along with the slides here, and potentially a chance to have a chat with me as well over a 30-minute period. Good stuff. So, basics of finance. So the first two things we need to understand when we're building wealth is a balance sheet and an income statement. Now, before I get started on this, I'd love to just ask you guys who is in this particular webinar. Can you give me your name and where you are from? My name is Andrew and I am from Brisbane. So I'd love to see a few of you guys put your hand up and say something because I'm all alone in this office and I'd love a little bit of company. So who's out there? All right, we're going to be talking about balance sheet and income statement. I need at least 2 more names so I can get things going. All right. There's a little bit of a lag here, so if you can put your name in ASAP. Sibani, welcome. Iggy, Perth. Okay, so that's the 2 that I need. So let's get into the balance sheet. So what is a balance sheet? Well, what I suggest you guys think about is what you own minus what you owe. Madison, welcome, right? Enter your net asset position. Let me say that again. What you own minus what you owe equals your net asset position. Your net assets is where the game is played. So what I need you guys to do is consider how to grow your net asset position on a year-to-year basis. Ideally, track it on a quarter-per-quarter basis so that you can see progress in your net assets. And I'm going to be breaking down the 3 core things you need to consider to ramp up your net assets on a year-to-year basis in a few slides' time. Right? So the balance sheet is what you own minus what you owe equals your net assets. Assets minus liabilities equals net assets. It's really as simple as that. Nothing to be scared of. It can also be called as capital, right? The capital that you're building, which is when invested properly, can produce an income that ultimately replaces your current income. And what I'd love for you to take away from this particular webinar tonight is the fact that you are in business, right? You have your career, you're potentially running your own business, and you are building your own investment portfolio, right? Like it or not, you've probably got a superannuation fund, right? And within that super, there's capital being invested. So you are an investor. So you are in business for yourself. So make sure you understand the financials. Because if you've got a surplus from your income statement, because what is an income statement? There's your income minus expenses equals a surplus or a deficit down the bottom. And that surplus or that deficit goes towards your balance sheet, right? That's the key. So what you need to do is make sure that you are always at a surplus. Welcome, Danny. Awesome. Siddhanta, welcome. Good stuff. Okay. So the goal is to grow your net asset position. So what does that mean? Well, ultimately, what you own minus what you owe is your net assets. You grow through 3 core things, I should say, right? Saving more, lowering taxes, and investing better. And we're going to dig deep today to make sure that we get this right. Now, before we get going, again, I'd like to run a quick poll. I just want to see how old you guys are so that I can sort of cater the information for your age group as well. So I can get a good grasp of where everyone is. And what we can do is we can maximize our time together today, basically. So like I said earlier, assets and liabilities, right? Understanding your net assets, because the game is all about building that up and building momentum, getting at speed so that it replaces your income to ultimately provide you with the freedom and flexibility you desire so that you can chase after the experiences you want in your life, right? Not everyone can do this, right? But the fact that you're coming to a webinar like this, thank you very much for answering the poll. Coming to a webinar like this and ideally, writing some notes and asking yourself, how do I get better, will ultimately increase the likelihood of you achieving your particular targets because you are starting to be proactive in your approach. Far too many people meander along through life not realizing that there's massive opportunity cost in what they're currently doing, which is the cost of inaction, right? Cool. Next step. So, income and expenses. What we need to do is focus on a surplus. So, my question to you is, what kind of surplus are you bringing in from your current household income? Right. So, one thing that I always focus on a few years ago was, well, what is the cost base or the minimum viable lifestyle that myself and my family could live on? Because this is an absolute skill. If you get this right, you can actually put yourself in a position to have massive confidence in the future. What does that mean? Well, if we look at it from a perspective of what is the minimum dollar figure that you need in your household to survive? What is the minimum dollar figure that you need in your household to maintain an existing lifestyle that is sustainable, right? So my personal figure is $85,000 per year for myself, my wife, and 3 kids, right? That is as low as I can make it at this particular stage in time, right? So what I suggest you do is have a think about how low can you make it go? Because if you know that is the case and you're earning this much, guess what? There's a surplus there. And what you're doing with that surplus will determine how fast you get to point B, which is your version of financial freedom, right? Growing your net assets is where the game is played. And the surplus with your cash flows is very, very important when it comes to this particular game. Right? Some of you here may have heard of financial independence, retire early, the FIRE movement. If you've heard of it, please say yes in the chat box. Right? If you haven't, say no. Right? And I'll go over what are the major things that the FIRE movement actually teaches people. Right? Any takers? Anyone has heard of this before? Financial independence, retire early. There's actually a big community online on this, right? So what they're doing is they're basically supporting one another and honing in on how do we speed up the process of achieving retirement as early as possible, right? And it starts off awesome. Okay, so a few of you have heard of it, others not, right? So it starts off with lowering, back to the baseline that I was alluding to earlier, lowering that baseline expenses as much as possible. Some of these people are living off $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 per year, right? So it's a little bit culty when it comes to this FIRE movement, but it has merit. So what you need to do is you can extract the gems from each of these kinds of movements. And what I suggest you do is extract the things that make sense for your particular circumstance from this particular webinar, right? So that you can make your finances do bigger and better things in the future. Because you ultimately want progress over perfection. Far too many people are trying to get things perfect without taking any action, right? So you need progress. So you need to ask yourself, how do you make it better, right? And understanding the level of your baseline expenses actually determines your freedom and flexibility, because you need to work out, well, how elastic is your baseline expenses and how elastic is your income capabilities as well, right? Because if you can lower your baseline expenses and increase your income exponentially, what happens is you get a massive surplus that you can make work for you a hell of a lot faster, right? So to cut the long story short, the FIRE movement is this. If you can live off, let's call it $25,000, $30,000 per year, year in, year out, what you need to do as a FIRE member is save up $30,000 times 20, i.e. $600,000, right? If invested at 5% per annum, that $600,000 can replace that 30K what your baseline is looking like, right? So this is the power of having the lowest amount of expenses possible. Obviously, not the most inspirational way of going about things, and obviously eating a lot of basic foods, lowering your transport, and not living in the most lavish lifestyle, but it gives you freedom and flexibility. Certainly not for everyone though. But what we need to do is understand that there's power in having a baseline expense available to you for worst case scenarios, especially in times like these when we've got a bit of a credit crunch, right? Where we're going to need to kind of scrimp and save a little bit more. And there'll be a few strategies that I'll be covering off a little bit later to get you some more cash flow to ensure that you've got enough buffers in place, right? Now, the other side of the coin is your elasticity in earning potential, right? Some of us in this particular webinar have got massive earning potential and others don't have as much of an earning potential. So what we need to do is work out, well, what resources do we have available to ourselves and maximize the output that we can produce for ourselves? Because in the end of the day, it doesn't particularly matter what everyone else is doing. It matters what you're doing, right, with your resources so they can increase the output and reach your full potential, basically. Right? So what I want you to understand is that wealth is a ratio for your income and expense ratio, right? The higher the income and the lower the expense, the easier the game will be played, right? So some people can save up to 50% of their income, put it away, either pay their debt down or build an investment portfolio. These people win in the long term because they've built, a solid habit for themselves, a solid foundation to ensure that they can build something significant for their families in the future. So how do you get started? 3 core questions that you need to ask yourself is, how can you save more? How can you lower your taxes? And how can I invest better? Right? With those 3 things, what happens is it increases your net asset position on a year-to-year basis. So if you optimize for a better outcome on savings, taxes, lowering your tax liability and increasing your return on investment, what ultimately happens is your net asset position increases exponentially, right? So if you're always asking the question of how, what happens is you're going to end up winning the game a hell of a lot faster, right? Lowering the opportunity cost, collapsing time, and ideally getting there in 10, 20 years faster, right? Because a lot of us, unfortunately, aren't aware that we're on a 30, 40-year time frame. So why not crunch that time down to a 10, 20-year time frame? Why not under 10? For some of us who've got enough assets in our portfolio at the moment, it's amazing what you can do in the first few years to build massive momentum so that you can be very, very comfortable in 5 years' time. Right? This is a very, very common thing that we do for our clients where they get this financial stress off their shoulders after working with us for a few years because we've squeezed as much juice out of the orange in the first few years so that we build massive momentum in the future. And it all stems from building your net assets first. So what I suggest you do is get pen and paper handy and write a ton of notes as I go through these specific scenarios with you guys. Cool. So enter this thing called the doubling game, right? Remember what I said about your net asset position, right? What I suggest you do is you link it to the doubling game. So if you look at this particular image on the left-hand side right here, right? We've got 1,000, 2,000, 3, 8, 4, 8, 12, 16, 32, 64, 128, all the way up to 1 million. The power of the doubling game is this. We are all on the same track, right? Now, some people are ahead of others are way behind. It all depends on where you're at the moment. And where you're at is your net asset position. So what I'd love for you to do is calculate what your net asset position is at the moment. Is it $1 million, right? Is it 250,000? Is it 32? Are you just starting out? Or are you already at 4 mil? Every single person's different. And what I suggest you do is work out, well, what does point B look like? And how many doubling cycles do you need to get to point B? Because there is power in simplicity, right? The doubling game is this. If you start off with $1,000 and you double it 10 times, you get to $1 million. And if you double your $1 million net asset position 10 more times, guess what? You get to $1 billion. Therefore, the majority of us in this room, if not all of us, will be more than happy with 20 doubling cycles in our lifetime. Right? Because $1 billion is a lot of money, right? That'll buy you a lot of freedom and flexibility to chase after the experiences that you want in your life, right? So the question is, where are you in the doubling cycle, in the doubling game? Have you doubled 8 times? Have you doubled 10 times? Are you a multimillionaire already? Or have you just cracked the $1 million mark, right? Every single person's different. So once you know exactly where you are, the next step is to work out what does point B look like, right? What I always like to do is set a goal, a stretch goal, and a big, hairy, audacious goal. And it all stems from what kind of income you're producing for yourself and your family at this particular stage in time. So what is the household income that you currently have, right? And the first goal that I always say is you try and replace your current income. So if you're on a $200,000 household income, guess what? You need a capital base of, what's that, 200 times 20 equals $4 million, right? $4 million invested at 5% will give you $200,000 worth of passive income. So my question to you is, what is your current household income? And what I suggest you do is you multiply that out by 20, and hey presto, you now have your initial goal. Your net asset position needs to get to this particular number. You invest your portfolio as strategically as possible so they can spit out 5% and then replace your current income. And hey presto, you are now financially free, right? You do not have to work for the man anymore if you choose not to. Now, obviously, if you enjoy what you're currently doing, happy days, keep doing what you're doing, right? But if you're not enjoying it, this is one way out. We are building a business of investments for yourself, right? Very important to see it as a business because we are all businessmen, we're all investors. We need to do it correctly. We need to ask, how can we optimize for a better outcome, right? And we need to get the right team behind us to ensure we're doing the right things, especially if it's not your cup of tea to talk about finances, right? So how long will one doubling cycle take you? We'll go over the sums a little bit later because it gets a little bit complicated. So I'll go through a little bit quickly, but in the end of the day, I will provide you with an opportunity to go over your specific numbers with me. I'll spend 30 minutes with you a little bit later. You can book in a time. We can go through your specific numbers so you don't need to be kind of writing as many notes as possible because ultimately there's quite a few sums to kind of go through, right? Cool. Okay, so saving more, tactics and strategies. Right. So the first one, what we need to understand is in your career, there are certain seasons, right? At the start of your career, in an ideal world, you want to start a season of learning. Where people go wrong is that they want to get into the season of earning ASAP. The problem with season of earning is you don't learn as much. Therefore, your potential to grow your capital or grow your income, I should say, starts to decrease. The more you learn, the more you earn typically. So what I suggest you do is have a think about what kind of season you're currently in. Are you maximizing your current potential? Have you learned enough to warrant a high enough salary from the marketplace? And what I suggest you do is ask yourself and do a little bit of an audit on the skill sets that you currently have. And is it a unique set of skills do you currently stack together to ensure that you are irreplaceable in the marketplace and therefore you can demand a higher income from your employer, right? So these are the things that you may want to consider if you're employed, right? There's a season of learning and a season of earning, and you need to sort of balance things out to ensure that you maximize your potential. Now, the third thing there is the SNME 500. What does this actually mean? Well, one of the influencers that I follow is by the name of Alex Hormozi. This guy is an absolute he's a business mogul basically, and he creates frameworks and concepts that makes it very, very easy to understand. And the SNME 500 is a bit of wordplay around the S&P 500, and you may have heard of it, right? It's the top 500 stocks in the USA, right? So the top 500 companies that you may want to invest in. And what he talks about is instead of investing full stop, why not invest in yourself first? In the season of learning, you need to invest in yourself, build a proper, unique set of skills to stack them together so that you become this powerful force in the marketplace where you can't be denied anymore, right? So what you need to do is work out, where are you going to be? What does it look like for the next couple of years for you? Have you got a unique set of skills to earn as much as you can? Because if you're earning sub 100K, maybe it's time to skill up a little bit more. If you're earning 100 to 200K, maybe you can ask yourself, well, do you want more? Do you want to get to 300, 400, 500, 600K per annum, right? Because it all takes an amount of skills to get you to that kind of level of expertise and that level of income. So you need to kind of work out, well, what are the next best steps to ensure you increase the likelihood of achieving that particular target? Because with a higher income means a higher surplus. A higher surplus means more money going into your investable assets in your net asset position, and therefore allowing you to make your money work a hell of a lot harder for you. Hopefully this is all making sense. Cool. So what we want to do is we want to increase the income. That's what the last slide was all about. We want to increase the income as much as possible, as fast as possible, add as much value as we can within the corporations that we're working in so that we can pull out a bigger surplus and get us to financial freedom a hell of a lot sooner. Right? Now, what we need to do is ask ourselves, well, what moves the needle in your workplace? What are the proactive approaches available to you today to maximize the efficiency, the profitability, right? To lower the cost in your current workplace, right? And if you can bring those actions back to a dollar figure, to your boss, to your manager, to the founder, to the owner of the business, what happens is they'll start to see that you're in the same team, right? And they'll start to see that they may want to increase your role and your responsibilities and therefore allow you to get a higher income. You need to add value, right? Maybe you can work out a variable pay structure, because if you can save your company, let's say $100,000 or $200,000, maybe you deserve 10 to 20K of that, right? Something to consider, right? You may want to have a think about, well, how do you maneuver through your career so that you can increase the likelihood of getting a higher income, thereby allowing you to take a surplus out? Because remember, what you need to do is you need to find that baseline expenses where you're comfortable enough so that you can scrape off the surplus and invest accordingly to build that investment business that I keep referring to. Okay, tax savings, right? Or before we go into tax savings, there is this one. There's the big expenses, there's food, shelter, and transformation. A quick strategy for some of you guys who have mortgages in the room is have a think about going from principal interest to interest only, right? It may save you 7,000, it may save you 10, sometimes 15, depending on how big your loan is, right? It'll save you that much, and you can pocket that and put it into an offset account. It's practically the same as paying it down, except you've got the utility to take that money out. In times like these where the interest rates are increasing, right, what we want to do is we want to have more cash in our back pocket as a buffer to ensure we've got massive flexibility for the future, right? So you may want to consider going from P&I to interest only for 1 or 2 years, just to give you a bit of a reprieve, increase your emergency funds, and potentially look at other opportunities, because there's a ton of opportunities out there we can capitalize on massive upside, right? We're finding a lot of different opportunities in the marketplace because people are scared to do anything these days, right? And if you understand what you're doing, if you know what kind of opportunities you're looking for, you could be ready to pounce and get a deal of a lifetime this year, right? Another strategy is extending out your loan. So let's say you've got 25 years left on your loan. Well, at PNI, what you can potentially do is go interest only over a 30-year period. And what happens, it lowers your repayments dramatically, allowing you to pocket $10,000 to $15,000 per year until such a time where you can decide to plow it back into the debt. Or if you can find a better opportunity elsewhere, you may as well, right? Tap into that and start investing accordingly, right? So what next one here is refinancing your loans, understanding that there's a difference between good debt and bad debt. Far too many people are piling both things on, thinking that all debt is the same. No, not the case. Bad debt is debt that is associated with an asset that depreciates in value, like a car, right? Credit card, car loan, personal loan. These are bad debts. You don't want that in your portfolio, right? You don't want to be buying a brand spanking new car, and on the day you drive out of the driveway there, you lose 20% of the value, right? And if you go into debt, you're going backwards exponentially. That's the last thing you want to do. You want to tap into the compounding effect ASAP within your net asset position, right? So that you can get to speed, so that you can get to financial freedom decades sooner, right? So understand the power of good debt and bad debt, and have as much good debt as possible in your portfolio within reason, right? You want to make sure that you can afford it, because you don't want to put yourself in a position to be forced to sell anything because you can't make the repayments, right? This is why it's important to understand your balance sheet and your income statement. If you know what your net asset position is and you know what your surplus is, it's akin to going to war, understanding fully what your army has so that you can make the necessary moves that you need to make to win the battle, right? Because if you're going in there not knowing what you have, guess what? You are hoping and praying for a better outcome. Now, I don't know about you, but hoping and praying for a better outcome is not a very good strategy. It's not one that I would bank on, basically, right? The last thing you want to do, I call it hopium. The last thing you want to do is take the drug called hopium in your life. You don't want that in your life, because it makes things a hell of a lot harder, right? Hopefully this is all making sense. Now, let me ask you a question, right? How experienced are you as an investor? Would you classify yourself as someone who's a professional, right? Would you say you're confident in your current strategy at the moment? Or would you say you have no experience whatsoever? Right? What are the three things? Which one do you fit into the most in this particular poll on the right hand side? Right? No experience at all. Anyone confident or any professionals out there who's come along to this particular webinar? Right. So what we want to talk about next is lowering your tax payable. Right. One of the three core things to increase your net assets sooner rather than later. So there are two kinds of taxes that you want to consider in your personal lives, right? There's income tax, which gets taxed on a year-to-year basis, and the capital gains tax, which gets taxed upon sale, right? So what we want to do is we want to make sure that you understand these two things so you're not paying unnecessary taxes moving forward, right? Thanks for answering the poll, guys. Good stuff. Right, so what we want to do is we want to lower your assessable income by loading up on tax deductible expenses that you otherwise would be spending on, right? That's the game. We want to lower your assessable income so that you, instead of, let's say some of you are earning over 180K, if we can lower your assessable income under 180K through strategic expenses, what happens is you get a 45 cent off, right? Discount on those particular expenses. Right? Very, very powerful strategy if you know what you're doing, right? What not to do. Do not buy a property, brand spanking new property, purely for the tax savings, because the spruikers out there will tell you, right, that a brand spanking new property will give you massive tax depreciation, right? I agree with that. It will give you tax depreciation, but the problem is, guys, on the investment filter, it doesn't do you any justice because you're utilizing your borrowing capacity, which is the catalyst for massive wealth creation when used properly, right? Far too many people are sleeping on this particular strategy, hoping for the best, taking hopium on a brand spanking new property off the plan, right? They think it's going to grow in value. Unfortunately, it doesn't grow in value for the next 10, 15 years. And far too many people come to me after that 15-year time frame asking for help. And the last thing I want is for all of you guys, or some of you guys in this particular webinar, to make the same mistake that a lot of these 50-year-olds are coming to me to ask for help to optimize for a better outcome for their retirement age, basically. All right. So make sure you get this right. And if there's one thing that you take away from this particular webinar is do not buy a brand new property. Please, please don't do that. Now, there are outliers out there. There are properties that are brand new that will outperform, right? But the vast majority of them are pieces of crap. Excuse my French, right? They're not going to produce an income or a return on investment for the next 5 to 10 years. And they're pretty much just a massive waste. It's a big opportunity cost because you otherwise could have invested in something more robust and give you a higher return on investment, and sometimes double within that 5-10 year period, thereby allowing you to write this thing down, allowing you to speed up the velocity of money, right? What you need to do is think about this thing and make your money move as fast as possible, get as high a return as possible ASAP so that you can speed up your trajectory and get lift off from where you currently are. This is the hardest thing. You need to get that lift off because most people are on that, as I mentioned earlier, on that 40-year time frame. And the last thing you want to do is you want to be old and gray by the time you get to multimillionaire status. What you need to do is you need to get there ASAP by being strategic in your approach, proactive in the way you're doing it, resourceful and resilient in the way you approach your finances. Very, very important, guys. Far too many people sleep on this, and now's the time, now's the opportunity to write a few notes and think about this thing over the long weekend that's coming. We've got 4 days, right? So what we want to do is we want to at least spend 2 to 3 hours of those 4 days thinking about our financial future and making sure that we're asking the beautiful question of how can I make it better? How can I save more? How can I lower taxes? And how can I invest a hell of a lot better to hit my goals a lot sooner? Right. So some of the things that you may want to consider is establishing a trust. So what does a trust do? Well, a trust allows you to A, protect your assets, B, distribute the income and the capital gains to beneficiaries that will pay lower taxes. What does that mean? If you invest under a trust, you can save yourself tens of thousands of dollars per year when done correctly. Right? Very, very powerful entity to have in your portfolio. Right? And more importantly, it buys you your borrowing capacity back. Very cool stuff if you know how to structure things, because guess what? If you max out your borrowing capacity within reason, obviously, right? What happens is you can really amplify the return on investment, speed up the velocity of money, and get to your version of financial freedom a hell of a lot sooner. Because imagine if your goal is to replace $200,000 per year, right, on a year-to-year basis, right, and you get there 10 years sooner, how much is that worth to you, right? If you get there 10 years sooner and your goal is $200,000, guess what? That's $2 million in your back pocket because you got there 10 years sooner. Now, if you're proactive in your approach, you will get there years, if not decades sooner, right? Some of the people that I see are on a very, very slow trajectory. Just by tweaking a few things and not taking ridiculous amounts of risk, I'm talking about dialing things up one or two notches, right? What happens is they start to tap into their potential. They start to utilize the resources available to them so that they can speed up the process of that money, the velocity of money, and get to momentum sooner. Tap into compounding, right? The compounding effect for their finances so that they can provide themselves with massive optionality because they now have massive amounts of cash in their net asset position. That's the game. And that's the kind of milestone that I want you guys to hit, right? What you need to do within the tax framework is understand that you need to plan years in advance, right? Because the last thing you want to do is get slogged with massive taxes because you didn't know what to expect, right? So if you're buying and selling assets, make sure you understand you work with an accountant that is proactive in their approach. Because if you're working with someone that's reactive and always thinking about, oh, you should have done this, and you really should have seen me sooner, and all that kind of stuff, well, guess what? Maybe it's time to move accountants, right? Maybe it's time to work with someone who can help you be more proactive in your approach so that you can maximize your tax deductions on a year-to-year basis. Coupled with an investment strategy, what happens is you start to kick some butt, right? Entities and timelines, very, very important. I'd love for you to take that home and have a think about that during the weekend, right? Now, my favorite subject, investing better. It comes down to resource allocation, right? We've only got 168 hours in a week. What you need to do is invest that accordingly, right? That's a resource. You've only got so much energy on a day-to-day basis. You need to invest that energy on the things that you value most, and you've only got so much net asset position. And what you need to ask yourself is it performing as high as it could be? Because the delta or the difference between where it is to where it could be will change your life. So let's get cracking, right? So understanding risk versus return, right? Risk and returns and diversification. What I suggest you guys do, if you haven't done this already, is Google, right? Google risk profile questionnaire. Let me write it down in the chat. Risk profile questionnaire. Google that, and what will happen is you will start to kind of work out, or you'll start to see what questions to answer to start to build a diversified portfolio. Because the last thing you want to do is put all of your eggs in one basket, right? Because if you don't know what's going on in that basket, you may put yourself in a bit of hot water, right? And that's the last thing you want, right? Diversification is very, very important if you want to make sure that you are lowering the risk associated with building your portfolio. Right? Very important, guys. Because the last thing you want to do is lose the lot. Right? Understand what dollar cost average is. Right? Dollar cost averaging means just putting $1 in per week, $2, $10, $100 per week, $1,000 per week away on a specific investment portfolio that is predetermined at the start of your investment journey. Right? It's really as simple as that. Right? You can invest in shares, managed funds, ETFs, index funds, right? You pick your poison. There's a ton of information out there. If you want some help, I will have a 30-minute phone call with you where you can ask me as many questions as you like, right? To work out to see what's the best move for you, right? There's been a study by Fidelity, one of the biggest brokerage firms in the US, right? About who did the best, what kind of investor did the best with their investments, right? Got the best return on investments on their portfolio. And you know what? You'd be very surprised to find out who those people are. Any guesses? Any guesses on this, right? Okay, I got a question. How do I take the steps to start profiting after making the first trade of an investment share? How do I take the steps to start profiting after making the first trade of an investment share? Well, the problem with taking profit from investing in shares, Madison, is that you're going to need to wait for those shares to either increase in value or B, provide you this thing called a dividend, i.e., the profit from that particular company, right? So you're going to need to wait for that, right? And get the profit, and then you can start to think, well, do I need to get that capital gain in my life? Because if you do, and if you want to pocket that profit, you're going to need to sell it, aren't you? So in an ideal world, you buy low and you sell high. Not everyone can do that, so maybe buy and hold is the right strategy for you. Buy and hold for the long term, and just pocket the distributions, i.e., the dividends associated with holding onto these things, right? Every single person should have a particular strategy that they want to kind of incorporate in their financial strategy at the moment, in their financial plan, right? Because most people, unfortunately, only know one lever to pull, which is save up, buy that first house, pay that house down, hope for the best that super's enough in retirement. Maybe upgrade their house once or twice, wash, rinse, repeat, right? And then hope for the best for a super, right? That's a 40-year game. So what we want to do is we want to collapse that time in a 10, 15-year time frame, saving you decades, right? Getting you $2 million in your pocket a hell of a lot sooner, because the opportunity cost, guys, is every year that you don't get there sooner is your current household income forgone, unfortunately, right? So by being active and proactive in your approach, being resilient and resourceful, what happens is you start to build massive momentum into the future. Yeah. Cool. So what we want to do is we want to explore potentially investing in residential property, right? What are the key strategies, right? There's buy and hold, buy, reno, and hold, buy, develop, and hold, and buy, reno, develop, and hold. And as you go down that list, the more risk or the more intellectual property or skills or knowledge you're going to need to have to ensure that you win that particular game, right? Okay, cool. No worries, Madison. Good stuff. So when investing in property, what did I say earlier? Do not buy brand new. Whatever you do, please do not make this mistake. I've got a client who's got 5 of these brand new properties, and unfortunately, she's owned them for over 15 years, and they haven't really grown in value that much. She could be millions of dollars. She could be in a position that's a hell of a lot better than where she is now if she made the right move. So heed this particular warning. Stay away from brand spanking new properties, because you got to pay for the developer's profit, the builder's profit, the marketer's profit, and the real estate agent's profit, right? You want to stay away from those things, because what happens is you get left with the bag at the end, and the opportunity cost is 5 to 10 years of stagnation. It doesn't move at all, right? So what else could you have done within that 5-10 year period? You may have acquired a better property, i.e., an existing property, a more robust property in a better location that will potentially double in that time frame, thereby providing you with $500,000, $600,000 rather than eating a hole in your back pocket on a year-to-year basis, right? Every single decision is a trade-off, right? There's an opportunity cost for every single decision that you make. So you need to make sure that you have a team around you. And if you're not lucky enough to have parents or siblings or friends who are financially savvy, what you need to do is you need to pick and choose the influencers that you speak to, right? That you listen to and get influenced by, the books that you read, and the team of professional services, right, that help you, right, get to your goals a hell of a lot faster. You need to audit everyone and make sure they're the right fit for your particular strategy, because if they're not, it's time to kick them to the curb, right? So property is one of the best ways to build massive wealth in Australia, because the government is actually bolstering that particular industry and is providing a ton of incentives to ensure that industry stays buoyant, right? Commercial property is another one. Now, the problem with commercial property is you're going to need to have a higher deposit, right? 30% deposit versus residential property, you can go as low as 5%. We have clients who are buying at 100% loan to value ratio, right? Because we went with a guarantor, right? With their parents, right? The parents guarantored their property. And guess what? They're buying these $400,000 properties for as little down as $3,000 out of pocket, right? And guess what? Those $400,000 properties have increased by 50 grand in the last year. So they are absolutely killing it, getting a massive multiple on their investments. So why not? Why can't it be you? Right? Why can't you tap into a 70% return on investment or a 100% return on investment? It doesn't have to be a multiple of 2 or 5, right? Why, or 10, right? Why can't it be you? It comes down to the quality of the questions that you're asking yourself, right? You need to know what the next steps are. And unfortunately, in a world full of information, it's very, very difficult to understand what the next best steps are for yourself, right? So back to the doubling game. Very important to understand how this all works. Now, I'm going to go through this quite quickly, so bear with me here. Like I said earlier, if you stay until the end, I will provide you with a doubling game workbook that will walk you through this a hell of a lot smoother. So please bear with me and be patient, right? So what did I say earlier? From 1K to 1 mil, 10 doubling cycles. From 1 mil to 1 billion, another 10 doubling cycles. So my question to you is, where are you at? How many doubling cycles have you gone through? And how many more doubling cycles do you need to get through? Right? So I'm going to show you exactly how we calculate this thing. If you download the workbook, you'll get a bit of a grasp of how this works. Actually, and let me just provide that with you to you now, so that you can. Here we go. I've shared the workbook. There you go. Hopefully, some of you download it. You can go through it yourself in your own pace, right? So this particular couple can save $25,000 per year, $4,000 worth of taxes, and a return on investment on their existing portfolio of $55,000. Right? These are the numbers that we would be working together if we do decide to have a 30-minute call together. Right? So I'll be opening that up a little bit later. There are limited spots, so make sure you start clicking on that button so that you can book in that time together. Right? So with that net asset position of 520, their year-to-year net asset growth is 84K. So divided by 520 equals 16.2%, right? So with the rule of 72, what happens is you go 72 divided by 16.2 equals 4.4 years for their first doubling cycle, right? So that's the game, 4.4 years. So if we add it all up, and if their goals are 6 mil, 8 mil, and 10 mil, it's going to take them 49 years to get to 6 mil, 69 to get to 8, and 85 to get to 10 mil, right? So how do we speed that up? Well, ultimately, you need to increase your savings, right? You need to increase the taxes. So in this particular case, savings stayed the same, but the taxes, instead of $4,000 worth of tax savings, is now $10,000 per year. Instead of a return on investment of 55K, it's now $114,000. Right? And what happens when you do these kinds of numbers is it changes the dynamic dramatically. And instead of taking 49 years, it takes them 27 years, saving them 22 years to get there. Right? This is the power of understanding what levers you have available. Right? Instead of growing at 16.5%, right, percent per annum net asset growth, it's now at 28.6% per annum of net asset growth. A world of difference, and can save them years and years. This is a working example of one of our clients. We're just about to buy 2 investment properties for them, and we're changing their financial lives for the better, right? This is something that's available. All it takes is an extra step to explore a little bit further, right? So for this particular client, they've saved themselves decades to get to their particular target, 6 mil, 8 mil, and 10 mil, right? Saving themselves an income that they otherwise would have forgone, right? So the current trajectory was heading towards 2.43 mil over a 15-year period with one house. But if they were to work with someone like us, what happens is it changes the trajectory from 2.43 up to 4.19, thereby allowing them to net an extra 1.76 mil over a 15-year period. And this is just dialing it up one notch or two. This is the power of being strategic. And this is the power of focusing on speeding up your doubling game. Understanding what levers you can pull is the starting point, guys. Right? Very important, right? Because the next 5 years will determine, right, how comfortable you are in the next 10. What you do in the next 5 years will determine how comfortable you are in the next 10. Very important, right? So if you understand that, well, guess what? It's time to squeeze as much juice out of the orange, right? ASAP. Because the more you do today, this financial year or next financial year, because this financial year is just about to end, right? The faster you're going to get to the compounding effect. And the faster you get to compounding effect, the more of a difference you're going to make in your family's lives. right? Because the speed of each doubling cycle matters. And what you want to do is you want to speed that bad boy up, because what happens is every single doubling cycle doubles in length as well. So you want to ensure that you line up your ducks quite nicely so that you can actually utilize your resources to the best of your ability in an optimized manner to allow you to create a higher output, right, than what you're currently getting, right? Because slight changes creates a ripple effect. And the ripple effect that I'm referring to is tapping into the compounding effect, right? If you can get the compounding returns ASAP, what happens is you start to bolster your returns and you start to double your net assets a hell of a lot faster, right? And sometimes you need a team behind you to ensure this happens, right? Sometimes you can do it on your own, right? It all depends on how much resources you have, how much time and energy you're willing to put to these particular projects, right? Not everyone can do it by themselves, right? Knowing your current trajectory and optimizing for a better outcome is where the game is played. So my question to you is, what's the big domino? What's the next best step to allow you to compound a hell of a lot faster? These are the questions that you need to ask yourself over the Easter long weekend. What's the next best step? How do you speed up the process? Right? Do you understand how it works? And if you don't understand how it works, it's time to have a think about having a chat to someone like myself. Right? So there's a 30-minute call that's available. Now, I am quite busy this week. I may have 1 or 2 spots available next week. So have a look at this particular link, right, where you can book in a time where we can go through your specific numbers and we go through your current trajectory and what changes you may want to make to actually speed up your doubling game, right? And this is an opportunity for you to ask me as many questions as possible, right? Now, I can only spend 30 minutes, unfortunately, right, because I've got clients to help, but I'm happy to spend that time with you and go through the next steps to ensure that you understand where you're at, because point A is the starting point. Understanding what point B is will coach you through, guide you through what that goal actually looks like so that you can work out how fast will you get there within the current doubling game that you're playing, right? Do not reinvent the wheel, right? The last thing you want to do is pretend you're busy, right? The last thing you want to do is keep building that opportunity cost and waste yourself years and years of the passive income. Because imagine if you can get there 1 year sooner and you're trying to replace 200 grand, that's $200,000 in your pocket sooner. What if you get there 10 years sooner? 2 mil, right? Stand on the shoulders of giants who've done it before, who are doing it for people. Read the right books, come to the right webinars. So I commend you for coming to these particular webinars because it teaches you and it holds you accountable to the actions that you're hoping to take. So make sure you write things that you need to do down so that you can speed up the process of achieving your version of financial freedom. Right? Now, I've been through a ton of information. Do you have any questions for me? Right? Do you have any questions? What's the plan of attack? Do you have any specific things? Are you just about to do an investment that you need some information about? Where are you at? What questions do you have? I went through a bunch of information and I'd like to kind of hear back from you, right? Let me run a quick poll, right? How confident are you that you can bring all of this together, right? Would you consider yourself as one that needs help? Would you consider yourself not at all confident, somewhat confident, very confident? Or are you like jumping out of your skin thinking, let me at it? Where are you guys at? Where are you sitting? Somewhat confident. Love it. That's awesome, right? It's all about asking the question of how can you do it better? If you keep consistently asking that question, you're going to do much, much better than most people who are meandering along through life, taking hopium and hoping that they'll get the result that they want. Need some help? Yeah, book in that time, right? If you need some help, book in. Happy to go through, be a sounding board for you, guide you through the next steps so that you can actually be empowered financially, right? So back to what I was covering today. There's the balance sheet and income statements, right? If you understand how this all works, what happens is it starts to make sense financially, and you can start to build up massive momentum for the future, right? There's the financial independence, retire early kind of framework that I shared with you. Ultimately, if you're trying to replace a very, very small amount of expenses on a year-to-year basis, you will speed up the process of getting there, especially if you've got elasticity in your income earning potential, right? Because that allows you to save a higher surplus, allowing you to build your portfolio a hell of a lot faster. Remember, we are all in business at the moment, and we need to optimize for a better outcome on a year-to-year basis. right? We went through saving more tactics and strategies. And one of the big levers that you may want to pull is if you've got a mortgage, you may want to go P&I to interest only. From a 20-year loan to a 30-year loan, thereby allowing you to pocket $15,000. If things are getting tight, these are the strategies you may want to consider just to hold off for 1 or 2 years. You don't have to stay there forever, right? It's about being comfortable, having enough of a buffer, emergency funds in your back pocket, and reassessing how do you deploy your resources as best as possible to increase the output that you're producing, thereby allowing you to reach your version of financial freedom a hell of a lot sooner, right? We talked about tax savings, right? Talked about, I didn't really talk about superannuation. You can save yourself a bucket load of taxes within super. I talked about trusts, how you can distribute funds and save yourself tens of thousands of dollars per year, right? I talked about tax deductions. You may want to consider that. Talking to the right accountant, a proactive one, very important. Investing better. How are you currently deploying your net assets? Is it tapping into the potential or is it just sitting on the sideline? Are you happy with your current trajectory? Because if you are, guess what? Happy days. You don't need to do squat. Now, if you're not happy, if you want more out of life, and if you want to increase your rate of return, you may want to consider looking at your options, right? Far too many people sit on their hands and not realize that they're actually losing a ton of cash, because if they just take some action, what happens is they put themselves in a different level of finances in the first few years, right? Understanding the doubling game. Where are you at? What is your doubling speed? And that's if you book in, and notice that some of you have booked in already. In the next meeting, we'll be talking about exactly where you're at, how you're traveling within the context of the doubling game, so that we can speed this process up for you, right? The speed of each doubling cycle matters, guys. Very, very important, right? Subhani, thanks for your precious time today. It's a very insightful session, very interesting questions to ask oneself. Absolutely. You're very welcome, Subhani. All the best. Yeah, for sure. Very interesting. Like you just need to consistently ask these questions and hold yourself accountable to these particular targets, right? It's just like your career, your investment portfolio is as important, if not more important, than your career, right? You're in business. Make sure you harness the power, harness the potential that you currently have, and protect it as best you can. Work with the right people, right? Or read the books, the right books, right? Understand who you want to listen to. Who do you actually relate to the most, right? Very important. Slight changes and ripple effects, right? So ultimately, what you do now will determine how comfortable you are in the next 5 years, right? So what you need to do is ask yourself, well, what are the big dominoes in your life that will be the high leverage decisions that will allow you to reach financial freedom sooner? If you're not aware of those high leverage decisions or high leverage action steps, make sure you book in a call so that we can go through your steps so that I can enlighten you a little bit to speed up that process dramatically for you, right? Because far too many people aren't aware that they're on a 30, 40-year timeline. What we want to do is we want to squeeze that down within a 10-year timeline, right? ASAP. Because what options will you have if you got $200,000 passive coming in your bank account on a year-to-year basis, right? If your goal's 300 or 400K, imagine if you get there 10 years sooner. How much is that worth to you, right? So make sure you book in a doubling game clarity call if you'd like, right? Where we can go over your specific circumstance and make sure we leave no stone unturned. Now, I've been through a ton of information. Are there any final questions before I wrap this thing up? I'll stay for another couple of minutes for any final questions, right? Whether it be shares, property, saving, taxes, tax deductions, negative gearing, positive gearing. What do you want? Make sure you ask the question because you've only got 1.5 minutes left before I wrap this thing up. I thank you all for your time. My name is Andrew David Courtney, and I wish you all the very, very best. And make sure, out of the notes that you've written for today, make sure you have a look at them. Spend 2 or 3 hours during the Easter long weekend and have a think about how you can put yourself in a better financial position for the end of this financial year, and more importantly, in the short term, medium term, and long term for you and your family and in your future, right? Very important questions, and make sure you hold yourself accountable, right? If you don't have a team around you, you may want to consider booking a call with us to see if we're the right fit, right? You're very welcome, Daniel. Much appreciated, mate. Right? Cool. Good stuff. That's me, guys. Thanks very much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one potentially. Right? And for those of you who booked in a session, looking forward to catching up and breaking down your numbers for you so that we can go over them step by step. Now, before I forget, let me share the, I almost forgot to share the file. Here we go. The slides for today. The slides are there, so feel free to download the slides. I'll leave it up for another minute. All right, thanks again, guys, for your time. Thanks for chatting with me as well. Looking forward to catching up with a few of you. And for some of you who are not quite ready yet, well, I'll keep inviting you along to future webinars, and hopefully there'll be one nugget. And if you can consistently change some of your strategies and put yourself in a better financial position, what happens is you're going to get better and more financially empowered and hit your targets a hell of a lot sooner. Right? If you've got any questions, comments, topics you'd like for me to cover, make sure you hit me up in socials or right here, right now as well. Always a pleasure to spend some time with you guys. I understand the time is very, very precious, so I appreciate the fact that you're staying along and doing this thing with me tonight. So I look forward to catching up with some of you in the very near future. My name's Andrew Courtney. I'll see you all very, very soon. Ciao.